Good morning, St. Thomas. Welcome to the sermon. It's going to be a little different today. So I have a guest with me. So this is my cousin, John.
Hi, everybody.
He is out in California. I think he's living in Hollywood right now, right?
Adjacent. I live in Los Feliz, which is a neighborhood just east of. If you rolled a marble from the D in the Hollywood sign, it would eventually hit my house.
That's awesome. A lot of you might not know, there's some things you should know about our family. We come from a very large family. So John's father, Ray, is my mom's brother. And they have 7 siblings, and we had a wonderful grandmother and other stuff. And one of the things that's really interesting is a lot of us did some DNA testing a couple of years ago. We found out something really interesting, that we are 50% Neanderthal.
Isn't everybody?
I'm going to show you an old picture when both John and I were a little bit younger, so you can get a sense of this, because you'll really kind of understand it. This was back when John was in college, and I was not yet quite in college. So
look at that handsome guy on the left.
Right. Yeah. So I had glasses back then even, but John didn't need glasses. But how did you how did you get to look like you do now?
Just a lot of reconstructive surgery. A lot.
Right.
We're in Hollywood.
Right.
Nip tuck. Yeah. No, that photo is from the first Geico Caveman commercial I did, which was I was holding a boom mic and I threw it down and said, "Not cool." And the reason I know it's that one is because I have chest hair there, and that was a nightmare. Oh my God, the amount of glue they used on my body.
So one of the really funny things was I'm watching TV and this commercial comes on. It was actually the one that you said something about your mom, where you're talking
Right.
about the college, and
It's my mom. Let me put her on speaker.
Right.
That's with Talia Shire, by the way, who was
right. And I'm sitting in we were living in Arkansas at the time. I'm watching this, and I looked at Kelly and I said, I swear that's John. And I texted you, and I was like, John, are you the Geico? He's like, hell yes. And I was like,
I am a proud Geico caveman. This lovely house. Thank you, Geico. Thank you.
This sermon is brought to you. No, it's
it's product placement.
Yeah, there you go. And this is a fun photo. This is when we were little, of our cousins. So these are all first cousins hanging out at one of our infamous campouts. So you can notice in the back here, there's a couple of pretty awesome station wagons.
Yes.
Those were the old kind that had seats in the back that folded up that you could.
But no seatbelts.
No seatbelts. Yeah, who needs a seatbelt in the 70s? I mean, we had lawn darts.
Fireworks.
Not little fireworks, but
asbestos.
Bikes with asbestos. Yeah, bikes without helmets.
Right.
I can think of all kinds of things that went on.
Amazing we survived.
So John is down on down in the corner. He's got the cute little cowboy fireman hat on, probably cowboy hat.
I think that is a cowboy hat, which might be the inspiration for the show I did on Hulu, which was a Western. So that might have been where it all started.
I think all of the family campouts were probably an inspiration for that show.
Oh, I'm sure.
Especially the gunfights that used to happen between our uncles. So
the Lehrs are an amazing clan.
So part of you guys are all wondering why we're just not talking about Jesus or anything else. Part of why I got John on here is we wanted to talk to you about part of what we have in the service today, our scripture today, about peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I don't give you to the world as the world gives, but I give, do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid. We had this amazing grandmother, who I'm going to show you right now, named Nellie. And this is probably one of her finest moments. But this is Nellie Lehr. So, John, you want to talk about her? And
well, and I think you know this, Gar, but her maiden name was Walker, and right. My daughter's middle name is Walker, named after her. But she was Nellie Walker Lehr was a powerhouse of a woman. She was an orphan, raised by her sisters, I think. She was a Depression baby and raised 7 kids.
I think she miscarried 3 kids.
Miscarried 3 and had 7, 4 boys and 3 girls. I think that's right. She had all with one husband, LP, but then she married 3 more times after that, right? Is it a total of 4? I
I
think
think
she
it was, yeah, I think it was 4, and she was widowed with each one.
Yeah, she lived through all of them. And she was funny, and she liked to smoke more cigarettes, which I don't know if those are around anymore. But they were the ones that looked like little lady cigars.
Right.
And she, whenever we went to visit her, you would bring a 6-pack of Coors, a pint of Old Granddad, and a few packs of more cigarettes, and you would sit there and play Yahtzee with her.
That's
And
right.
she was just a ball. She was a great woman. And
What I remember about her was her survivability. I remember her tenacity, and ability, even though she never really had a whole lot. I mean, I don't think she ever had a lot of money, but she had a lot of love and she had a lot of family. And she got those kids through all kinds of stuff. I mean, you think about it, she got through just growing up, losing both her parents, being raised by her sisters. I think she was married young, like 15 or 16 years old.
yeah.
A couple of her boys went off to war. Her girls were having babies young. Lots of different challenges in our family. I mean, all kinds of things that happened.
My dad had a brain operation at the Mayo Clinic.
Right,
And
your
he almost
dad.
died.
Yeah. And he, how old was he? 19, something like that?
20, yeah, 19 and 20 was when
So,
he started getting headaches caused by an ear infection, they think, that he had had as a kid. But it was the size of a baseball, and they took it out, you know. Nowadays, I don't know if they would saw open a skull and take out an abscess, but they did then, and he survived.
so let's, now you guys all know about our family history. We're not going to tell you the really great stuff, because there's a lot more to say, but let's get into this because, you know, John, one of the things I admire about you is you're a tenacious worker. You went from, you know, a college graduate up at Northwestern, I think, right?
Yeah, that's right.
In Chicago. You did some work at a comedy place up there. You worked and worked and worked. You also had some failures along the way to get to
Absolutely.
where you are. Why don't you talk about like the role of peace in your life and the role of what all that meant? You share whatever you want to share in terms of how you got guided, because you're one of the most creative, funny, sincere people I know. I know you work with tons of people around alcoholism.
Yeah.
You're more than just somebody who writes interesting, funny shows, and more than someone who just does funny things. But you're actually, uh, I met some of your friends at your daughter's bat mitzvah last year, and we're not talking, you know, people who were really bonded with you in a deeply, both spiritual but also, um, just authentic way. They were there out of genuine love, and not just because it was a social event. And it was inspiring
Yeah.
to me. So let's just talk about that.
Well, yeah, it's strange, it's strange that sometimes the worst things can and end up being the greatest treasures, after you get through them. And that's almost always the case. You hear it so often, but yet you don't believe it. And yeah, I as after my parents divorced, and then in my early years of college, I started to experiment with drinking and drugs, and I enjoyed it. But that set me on a path. I'm wired in a way that others aren't wired. Now I know that it became this obsession, and alcohol, just took over my life. And I was able to kind of hold it together. And when you're an artist, it's somewhat accepted too. And so when I was discovered by a talent scout, and was flown to LA to do a showcase, and that kind of launched my career. But that was when the drinking was probably at its worst. And I was at that point, I was living with this woman, and then we broke up, and that's kind of where it really went dark, where I was really drinking by myself. And people made it clear they didn't really want me around. And I was arrested and spent the night in the county jail in Ventura County, where you go on vacation, leave on probation. And after that, I kind of woke up. Now, at the time, I thought that I had decided to quit. And if you had asked me, I would have said, "Oh yeah, I got sick and tired of that life." Sorry, my dogs are playing. I got sick and tired of being sick and tired, and I'm going to quit, darn it, and I'm going to do it. Now, I don't see it that way at all. The further away I get from that moment, I describe it as grace, and something that was granted me. And but nonetheless, I took advantage of it and kind of somehow was able to quit drinking, and it's been 24 years. And the weird part about it was, once I got sober, I thought things should get better. I thought the only reason I wasn't rich and famous and married to a supermodel was because I was drinking. And now that I had stopped, all that should come, and it didn't. It didn't at all. In fact, things got worse. And I, came to realize that the drinking was just medication for the real problem. And the real problem was a self-obsession, selfishness, and that I'm incapable of truly caring about others, and I needed to have a spiritual experience in order to actually have the power to actually be of service to others. Something that came so naturally to my dad, and so I had that experience. I went through the process and I worked hard, and now 24 years later, I work with other alcoholics and help them, find their path, not my path, but their path.
So what do you think? Like right now, we're in this. I don't know. I can't think of any other experience in my life that compares to the pandemic issue. I mean, everybody in the country has been in some kind of shelter at home. Jobs are under threat. Uh, I could do as good a job as the folks on SNL right now because they're doing SNL through Zoom. I mean, churches are going to Zoom.
God love them.
Everybody, it's really been great, but there's a lot of pressure on people. I kind of at the beginning of the shelter in home, we were like, yeah, we can do this, and it's all going to get better. And then it's like, it's not going to get better. And then it's like, oh, it's probably not going to get better for a long time. And last week, man, people were just on edge, and we've had this weird stuff where, like not in our community, but in some places where someone's not wearing a mask and somebody else is fighting with them, or, throwing guns out. And I mean, how do you, like, given the pressures that we're all experiencing, like, what do you think about this? How do you find peace? How do you find that inner peace? How do you keep pushing forward?
Well, the go-to for me has the medicine has always been being of service to others. So fortunately, I'm a father, and so when you're a father, you have plenty of opportunity to be of service to your children. And I work with a lot of and I work with a lot of alcoholics, and that is and I've been connecting with lots of people and that I haven't connected with. You and I have been connected, but I've connected with other family and friends. I spoke to a friend from high school, or texted back and forth with a friend from high school that I hadn't talked to forever. And same thing, she was having, those issues you're talking about, just feeling exhausted from it. And I don't know, my spiritual practice involves meditation. And I think meditation is practicing to live in the moment, as best you can, and try not to guess what's going to happen, and try not to beat yourself up for what did happen, but just be here now. I mean, that's impossible. I mean, but for moments, and to work towards that, you can't exercise that muscle directly. That's my experience, but you can exercise the muscles around it that will help support that muscle. So by being of service, and by meditation and other spiritual components I add to my day, I think they help. The problem is you don't see the direct connection. It's always indirect.
Right.
And that's where the rub is. And it's easy to be like, nothing's working. But I don't know. Coming from where I came from, where I caused a lot of damage to people around me, if I'm not causing damage to people, I'm winning, these days, these past 24 years, and so if I do screw up, I try to make amends as quickly as possible, not to make me feel better, but to make them feel better.
One of the things I remember you and I were talking, when I was out last year, we were visiting, and I think you and your brother and his wife Vita, and I think Jules was there. We went up and we were swimming or hanging out at the pool before I had to take
Yes.
off. And I went over and was trying to be really helpful, and I got everybody drinks, right?
Yes.
And I don't, you also know that I don't drink and haven't for a long time. Just
Right.
by choice. I have a lot of history of that in my family, and I've made the decision probably 20 years ago. And so it's just one of those things. I just prefer not to. So I got myself some water, got you some water. I think I had a couple other drinks for people, and I brought them all together. And I remember I kind of handed them over to you, and you're sort of like, there's vodka there. So
I know my antenna just do,
yeah. So you were really good about, you're like, well, and we got you different water, I think, and it was fine.
Yeah.
Even just a taste of it was enough. That to me, like, I remember that. I don't remember that. I remember actually a lot more about that time, which was more fun. But that temptation, like the temptation to fall, or the temptation to fall into stress, the temptation to fall into a temper, the temptation to give up.
Yeah, the temptation to be dramatic about what's going on, to stir it up. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Because that is, from my point of view, from the sobriety point of view, is an expression of my self-obsession. When I'm being upset and dramatic, and even when I'm beating myself up, it's still about me, and that's where I know trouble can really begin for me. And if I'm not careful, that can lead to me convincing myself that a drink is just fine. It was interesting when you talk about that moment, because that was a very big moment for me, because I tasted alcohol for the first time in probably, I don't know, 15 years in that moment.
Well, just throw it up to one of the other Lehrs to lead you down that path. I'm sorry, John. So.
I didn't know. You didn't know. It was an accident. It was a total accident. And I called my sponsor later, and he said, "Did you order the drink?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Did you take 2 sips?" And I said, "No." And he said, "You're fine." Because things happen. But I do remember that moment, because every atom in my body lit up and was just like, let's go, like after all those years, it's right there ready to go again. It's so fascinating.
I think what's kind of interesting about the pandemic time is I think a lot of us are being pushed into moments like that, where like we could fall into a default stress reaction or a default thing like that. That's where I think, like, for me, my spiritual path is driving me towards empathy and compassion, which I know that's similar to your path.
Yes.
Empathy and compassion for my fellow neighbors, knowing, like, I'm okay right now. So my role is to serve others if I can. I still got to do some self-care, but there's always this sort of push around us where things are just heightened. There's fear, there's all kinds of opportunities. I mean, you could be conveniently racist now. You could be conveniently a jerk. You can be conveniently sexist. You can be, there's lots of ways to take
he's
advantage.
Just wound up over the pandemic. Right. Yeah. He's not really like that. He's just very upset over the, I know. And we talk about a righteous resentment is the worst kind of resentment. Right. Because or righteous fear being the worst kind of fear, because, man, if you can justify it, you give yourself license to do so much more. I mean, if I forget to put my mask on, we're still in lockdown, and masks are because we're all, put together, and you have to wear a mask no matter what. If I forget my mask, I assume people to give me a break. Okay, I forgot it, but I won't next time. Sorry. But if I have my mask on and I see somebody else with their mask off, I'm furious at them. Right. It's crazy what the brain does.
I was thinking about our grandma and thinking about our conversation and thinking about Nana, and she was really faithful.
Yeah, she
I think
was.
she went to church most days, if I remember correctly. Went to mass 3 or 4. She was Roman Catholic. She went to mass. She had rosaries, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
I've often wondered. I'd love to have a conversation with her right now, because I think there'd be so many things, to kind of
She
like.
could tell us.
She
Yeah.
could tell us. I mean, she was a great advice giver. I remember I went to her about girlfriends and stuff like that. I'm sure she was laughing inside, because there was all kinds of stuff that I asked her. It was ridiculous, but I wonder what her life experience sometimes would sort of say to us, that sort of sense of faith-filled, that pushing through all the things she pushed through and lived through and survived and still had love and still had compassion and still had empathy. I don't know that you have an answer, but I just wonder. I wonder what we could think about that in terms of where we're at right now.
She was so ritualized too. Her life was. She led a very. It was free. She had the freedom to do what she wanted, but she knew what she liked, and she knew where she worked, where she was best, and kind of went there. And I kind of see that as like going with the flow of the universe, where I'm kind of being guided. It's not always the best place to go, especially with me, because I'm insane, but often it is. And like, if I don't know what to do, and if I'm at like a fork in the river and I don't know which way to go, I've had to learn this. This is an artificial thing that I've had to put over me, is just to sit down and wait
Right.
to know. And that always serves me well. But it's granted. It's like working the muscles around the muscle. Like, that is granted to me, because it's always later where I'm like, hey, wow, I didn't send that reply all email telling everyone to, screw off. I didn't do it. Or, wow, I let that guy cut in front of me in traffic. That's weird. That's not like me. So in the moment, I don't realize it, but afterwards I'm like, hey, maybe some of the spiritual practice is changing me.
Right.
And
So
she felt that way to me, Nana. She felt like the grooves were deep for
right.
her.
I think her parents died of the flu. It wasn't the big pandemic, but it was a smaller time, and they died close together, like within a couple of
Yeah.
months of each other. And I think about that all the time. I think about some of the stuff we're going through, and just how she would have gotten through that. I mean, part of you get through that because you don't have a choice. You don't have any idea that there's a choice to do something different. You just go through it.
Yeah.
And her sister raised her, and just all the different things that happen. But so what would be your last words for folks today, if they're thinking about the theme of peace and how not letting your hearts be troubled, don't be afraid? What would you say, just to offer folks?
Yeah. I mean, happiness used to be, I went for happiness, which was this, amazing experience through drugs and alcohol, this intense thing. I thought that's what happiness was. And after all this time, my definition of happiness has changed to this calm, quiet space, which I mean, to know me is what a surprise, what a journey. And, I think a big part of that is putting myself in other people's shoes and empathizing and cutting people some slack. When I can do that, I feel better, in the long run. So cut everybody some slack.
Empathy, compassion, serve.